All right, so this is probably going to simultaneously be one of the least surprising and yet what should be most scandalous stories that you're going to hear, because the Pentagon has, surprise, surprise, failed its audit once again for the fifth time in a row. Okay, so here from Responsible Statecraft, they had a great breakdown on all of the details behind this, and then I'm going to give you a little bit more context just in terms of military spending on the global stage, what that actually looks like, as well as a absolutely hilarious video that encompasses or gives a description in terms of how completely ridiculous a lot of the spending that we put into the Pentagon actually is in terms of the results that we are getting out of it. So here from Responsible Statecraft, they say, last week the Department of Defense revealed that it has failed its fifth consecutive audit. They got a quote here. They say, "I would not say that we flunked," said Department of Defense Comptroller Mike McCord, although his office did note that the Pentagon only managed to account for 39% of its $3.5 trillion in assets, okay? 39%, meaning they literally cannot account for an outright majority of their assets, okay? And he's saying, oh, we didn't flunk. No, you did flunk. You got much worse than just flunking. You got basically a 39% on this audit, okay? So, I mean, absolutely hilarious that he would give that description there, but he says, the process is important for us to do, and it's making us get better. It is not making us get better as fast as we want. Yeah, I mean, no shit, but I guess they continue. They say, the news came as no surprise to Pentagon watchers. After all, the U.S. military has the distinction of being the only U.S. government agency to have never passed a comprehensive audit. Okay, so keep this in mind. Whenever you hear corporate Democrats, or Republicans for that matter, coming out and using all of these arguments that we hear relentlessly, you heard it during the 2020 and 2016 Bernie Sanders campaign, how are you going to pay for it, right? When it comes to all of these just basic programs, whether it's child care or health care with something like Medicare for All, or infrastructure spending, or raising wages, or anything that actually just helps average working class Americans, they always bring out that line, how are you going to pay for it? There's no way that this is going to be, the cost that you say that it is. And meanwhile, you look at something like the Pentagon budget, something that wouldn't even come close to helping average Americans in the ways that all of those other social programs that frequently get rejected actually would help average Americans. But you look at something like the Pentagon budget, I mean, we're edging up closer, if not already there, with a total amount of close to $1 trillion at this point, and they can't even account for a majority of their assets. I mean, again, this is a type of story that you won't hear on many corporate media outlets. It'll just sort of get glossed over because we become so desensitized to the military industrial complex, to all of this defense spending and all of this. And so it's like, this is something that just gets overlooked, but this should be like the biggest scandal in the country. I mean, think about how much money, number one, we could save taxpayers if you want to use that type of a framing, which obviously I have my disagreements with modern monetary theory and all of that, but you want to talk about what a good investment looks like in this country versus a bad investment. This is a textbook example of a horrific investment. I mean, not only is this money being spent to go, get us into wars overseas that we have absolutely no business being involved in, we also sell a lot of our weapons to nefarious actors like Mohammed bin Salman of Saudi Arabia. We sell weapons to Israel. We sell weapons to every, nefarious government around the world or dictatorship around the world that will buy our weapons. We have this entire industrial complex that surrounds the military that it's not even just these, military weapons manufacturers that are profiting off of it, but it's also members of Congress. I mean, I've talked about on this story so many different times how many members who are sitting on the armed services committees in the Senate and the House have direct financial investments within the stocks of a lot of these weapons manufacturers. I mean, they make money when they give more money to these companies through the defense bill. Okay, so I mean, it's just like a one-to-one cycle of corruption, or a circle jerk of corruption that is going on at every single level of our government. And so, obviously it has catastrophic effects for the world, but it also has catastrophic effects just for the American people. Number one, because of the corruption, and also number two, because they use, all of the spending that we dump into things like the military budget as an excuse to say, oh, look, all of the money dried up. I wonder where it went. We can't afford all of these other basic improvements to people's lives, right? So they continue. And they say what did raise eyebrows was the fact that the Department of Defense made almost no progress in this year's bookkeeping, and of the 27 areas investigated, only 7 earned a clean bill of financial health. 7 out of 27, which McCord describes as basically the same picture last year. So not making any progress on this whatsoever, because there's no pressure on them to make any progress on this whatsoever coming from Congress, who are either bought off and controlled by them, or just ideologically agree with the project of the military presence being the watchdogs, being the police of the world. But they continue saying that the Pentagon's most famous recent boondoggle is the F-35 program, which has gone over its original budget by $165 billion fucking dollars to date. But examples of overruns abound, as Senators Jim Inhofe from Oklahoma and Jack Reed from Rhode Island wrote in 2020, the lead vessel for every one of the Navy's last 8 combatant ships came in at least 10% over budget, leading to more than $8 billion in additional costs. And just something that's kind of funny to give you an example of how completely, ridiculous this wasteful spending actually is. I mean, you want to talk about, fiscal conservative economic policies or whatever. Maybe you should check with the Pentagon budget first and foremost. But of course, you have, Republicans going around and trying to slash programs like Social Security and Medicare and Medicaid instead of slashing something like the Pentagon budget, which can't account for a majority of their financial assets. But anyways, something funny in regards specifically to this F-35 program. So as tweeted out here by a friend of the show, Kyle Kalinske, over on Secular Talk, okay, this is a project that we spent $1.7 trillion on. Okay, so how is this project going? Let's just go ahead and check in with it real quick.
Oh, he just crashed. Oh, shit. Oh, shit.
Okay, so, I mean, listen, hope that guy's okay, I guess, but, this is $1.7 trillion right there, okay? Down the drain, completely failed program, and, you get a kind of hilarious video here of some guy being forced to eject from the cockpit as this plane is sort of just, like, bouncing 2 feet off the ground, I guess, and can't figure out the landing procedure or anything like that. So this is where your money is going to, okay? Well, they can't pass an audit while they're spending nearly $1 trillion a year, $165 billion just on the overrun costs, the overestimates of these original estimates on the F-35 program, and that's what you have to show for it, okay? So a little bit more here from this Responsible Statecraft article. They say, the Navy plans to expand its ship production in an effort to maintain an edge over China, which this is kind of the key part here to me, but I'll circle back around to this, with a particular focus on a new attack submarine and a destroyer ship. They say the Pentagon has proposed 3 versions of this plan at an average cost of $27 billion per year between 2023 and 2052, a 10% jump from current annual shipbuilding costs. And also keep in mind, this recent like $860 billion defense spending bill or war spending bill or whatever you want to call it, the Pentagon budget, this was even more, I think like $45 billion more than what the Pentagon was asking for. Okay, so Congress was like, no, we need to give them even more money than this already close to $1 trillion budget because, why not go buy yourself some goodies, I guess, right? Okay, so the Navy getting up to, some financial shenanigans here with all of their shipbuilding costs being overrun, but they say the CBO says that this is a big underestimate, okay, of that original $27 billion. They say the independent agency's math says the average annual cost of this shipbuilding initiative will be over $31 billion, meaning that the Navy is underestimating costs by $120 billion over the program's life. So again, not exactly sure what's going on there with your accounting procedures, but, again, the part here that kind of sticks out to me the most is that they're saying the Navy plans to expand its ship production in an effort to maintain an edge over China, okay, and they're referencing the Navy here, okay, so what is that talking about? Basically, Cold War, 3, or a Cold War II electric boogaloo, or, a World War III electric boogaloo, whatever you want to call it, that, the United States is positioning ourselves aggressively towards China and, trying to make sure that they do not supplant our position or disrupt our position as the global dominant military and economic hegemon of the world, the single global superpower that stands above the rest and get to be the, global police force. Basically, we're just gearing up our plans for World War III in order to do what exactly? Just spark off a global war that would be even more catastrophic than, World War II, something that could escalate towards the widespread use of nuclear weapons. I mean, what are we really talking about here? Because whether or not you think that China is like a a threat economically or politically to the United States and our position in the world, sacrificing global life as we know it or civilization as we know it during a nuclear exchange between the U.S. and China, the two largest militaries on the planet, wouldn't really be great for the stock market or whatever the fuck people who, are pushing this line actually care about at the end of the day. So probably something we should be focusing on avoiding instead of gearing up to, pull off at the end of the day, as if like any side would be a winner or come out victorious on the other side of a war with the United States and China and all of our various allies. I mean, it's just a completely insane prospect to just float out there as if it's something to consider. But they say, despite long odds, a bipartisan group of lawmakers led by, of course, Senator Bernie Sanders proposed a bill last year that could help to make that happen. And they're talking about potential cuts, given the fact that they can't pass an audit and given the fact that this, budget has ballooned to such ridiculous and preposterous levels here. But so this is basically the plan. They say the legislation would cut 1% off the top of the budget of any part that the Pentagon fails an audit. That means if the proposal, this recent one, had already passed, 20 of the agency's 27 auditing units would face a budget cut of 1% this year. So I would look at that and I would say 1%, that isn't even going remotely close to enough, clearly. I mean, if they can only account for 39% of their assets, we should be looking much, higher in terms of our goals for cutting the Pentagon budget. But really, at this point, here in the United States, we're just trying to get to the point where we don't hit $1 trillion. I mean, that's literally what we're fighting against. It's an uphill battle every single year. They are increasing military spending, which is also crazy because we just got out of like a 2 decades long war in Afghanistan. And we need billions, tens of billions of dollars more in weapon spending. I mean, that's the situation that you're telling us is reasonable for the American people to just accept at face value. I mean, it's just completely fucking ridiculous. So, I mean, credit to Bernie Sanders for being one of the 11 senators, only 11, who voted against this $860 billion military budget. And I can give you the actual names here. So, in terms of the no votes on this bill, we had Booker, which is, I guess, kind of a surprise on this. So we had basically an even split between Democrats and Republicans on this, obviously for different reasons. But the Democrats were Booker, you had Ed Markey, you had Jeff Merkley, you had Senator Elizabeth Warren, you had Wyden, and then, of course, you had Senator Sanders, who's an independent but caucuses with the Democrats. Then on the Republican side, you had Braun, you had Josh Hawley, you had Mike Lee, Rand Paul, Loomis, you had, I guess that's it. Okay, so that's the list of who actually voted no against this. You can look at the list and see for yourself who voted yes for this and then who was just like absent that day, I guess. But that's the breakdown. I mean, again, just a lesson in terms of like how, when it comes to the United States Congress, we are completely bought off and controlled by corporate America, the military industrial complex. And for virtually any time that there is going to be legislation passed towards, improving corporate America or giving more money to these weapons manufacturers, there is going to be bipartisan agreement. There's two main areas where there is pretty much always bipartisan agreement, and it is on benefiting the wealthy, benefiting the rich, and benefiting the U.S. military industrial complex. And that's pretty much across the board, very consistent, regardless of if you have a Democrat, a Republican in the White House in control of, each branch of Congress or anything. It's something that basically does not change. We consistently have higher and higher military spending. And this is somewhat outdated now because now this has been bumped up to $860 billion. But this is just one of those, easy comparisons that we frequently make in terms of demonstrating how absurd this budget actually is. So, again, this is a massive undercount, but just compared to some of the next largest militaries in the world, we have the United States. Then over here, we have China, which makes up at this point, a third of our military spending. We have India, which is a U.S. ally. We have the United Kingdom, which is a U.S. ally. We have France, U.S. ally, Germany, Saudi Arabia, Japan, South Korea, all U.S. allies. The only real, perceived adversaries here on this list would be Russia and China. And just those two countries alone would be, less than half of our military spending on an annual basis. So, I mean, again, it's just completely fucking ridiculous. And this is another thing, and I don't actually have the map pulled up here. I guess they have some map here. But, I mean, if you actually look at where we position our military bases, which we have more than 800 of around the world, okay? 800 military bases around the fucking world. Who knows how much money we're spending on that? But if you actually look at, the positioning of this, I mean, obviously we have a lot in Europe that we've had since the end of World War II. We have many in Japan. That's the same case at the end of World War II. But, I mean, you look at, that paragraph back in this responsible state Statecraft article where they say we're gearing up for a potential confrontation with China. And I mean, look at where our military base is. I mean, this is the border of China here on the East Coast facing the Pacific Ocean. And I mean, of course, we have some in Japan, but we have plenty in Taiwan. We have some that are down here, like in the Philippines and a bunch of other countries as well. And I mean, we basically surrounded their country with military bases. I mean, could you imagine for 1 second? I mean, look at the Cuban Missile Crisis and all the chaos surrounding that. We almost sparked into a global war once again in World War III with the Soviet Union, just at the prospect of them putting their missiles close to our borders in Cuba. And, I mean, you look at the way that we have structured our military bases surrounding China while we're simultaneously using all of this escalatory rhetoric and saying we're preparing our military, we're preparing our Navy to try to keep an edge over them. There have been threats from the Biden administration that if they take action on Taiwan, that he's going to be willing to come to the defense of Taiwan militarily, which, again, would just result in an all-out war. And it's like, I mean, we would never stand for this, right? So the fact that we haven't already had a war with China is, a demonstration, I think, of somewhat of their restraint or at least their own internal calculations. But, I mean, could you imagine if China had military bases stationed like right out here on the border of the Pacific or like down here in Cuba or Mexico or, in Canada or something like that? We would absolutely never stand for it. We would instantly go to war with them over that. And we know that because of historical precedent. But, listen, again, at the end of the day, this is one of those stories that is definitely going to get broadly overlooked. It's something that is, so run of the mill that we become desensitized to it to the point where a lot of people just don't even, think twice about it. It's sort of just like, yeah, okay, the Pentagon failed an audit and yeah, okay, they overwhelmingly managed to pass another higher military budget. But I mean, this is something that absolutely should be a massive, massive scandal. Not only the fact that they can't pass an audit for, the fifth time, they've never successfully passed an audit, but not only that, but on top of it, just the amount, the sheer magnitude of the U.S. military budget right now, how many bases we have overseas, the, preparations that we are making for some sort of a broader conflict that could literally upend civilization as we know it, or be completely disastrous for the American people, for the people of the world. This is all scandalous. We need to slash the military budget. Obviously, we need to rein in our presence as the global police and, actually start spending that money on shit that will materially improve people's lives instead of destroying lives and infrastructure and decimating people across the world.
Everyone is saying good Politic guy has the best Politic. Believe me, no one does it like him. Believe me. Everyone is saying